Kyle Klingman with Track Wrestling. We have someone that has such a deep history that I think he probably loves wrestling as much as anyone on planet Earth. It is Gary Taylor. He has 39 years of experience at Rider University. Now since retired, but we'll get into a slew of things, hopefully including your music and Harley Davidson. But Gary, thanks for being part of this.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it, Kyle.
You love Harleys, don't you?
Yeah, wow, that goes way back. I've been riding Harleys, I'm trying to think, probably since 78, we're in there.
What got you interested?
Well, just some people that, coming out of high school and all of that, I knew some people that some of them had Triumphs at that time. Triumph was a pretty big thing with bikes and so on. And then, I had another friend that had a Harley Sportster. I actually ended up buying that later down the road off of him. And I liked the Harley a lot more so than the Triumph. I like the looks, I like the sound, I like to ride a lot better. You didn't sit up, as high as you do on the European bikes and all of that. But it's I've enjoyed riding. I don't ride with a lot of people. I don't like to ride with a lot of people. Especially if they're into messing around at all or drinking or anything like that. Because anyone that's really ridden for as long as I have ridden knows that you're driving defensively about 90% of the time. And it's only when you get out on, a back road or a country road or a river road and that kind of thing away from traffic that you can really enjoy the ride 10 times more, because everything else, as I said, and even on those roads, there's elements to driving defensively. That's all.
When did wrestling enter into your life?
Oh, that was in about 5th grade. I had a brother that was, very good at it. And, just like so many other people, when your brother's good at it, you're just kind of, plus he used to beat me up a lot. He was a lot bigger than me. And it made me fight harder and so on. So he kind of set the stage for it. And then in about 5th grade, one of the coaches had asked me to come out, for the junior high, you had to just come out and work out with them. And I was doing pretty good. And so, they decided they were going to let me just come to practice when he went to practice. So I was in 5th grade, fourth or 5th. I can't remember right now, but it was right in there.
What is it about wrestling that hooks you? Because it's a hard sport. What is it that captures you and keeps you in it this long and makes you part of the fabric of the sport?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with it's a one-on-one sport, and it has a team element to it. But Kyle, I come from parents that were hardworking people and work ethic and all of that. And set really good examples on work ethic. My father drove truck for Chicago Bridge and Iron, hauled steel all around eastern Pennsylvania and so on. My mother was pretty much a homemaker, and they set a good example. So the work ethic part of it actually appealed to me, even from a young age. I was in high school and so on. I worked in the summer in construction with blacktop and doing roads and driveways and all that. So the work ethic part of it actually appeals to me, because wrestling is one of the few sports you can outwork some people, okay, but you got to put in a lot of time, and there's no guarantees that it'll happen, that'll work. But more often than not, if you do it long enough and you work hard enough, it will work. And it's just like a wrestling match. There's no guarantee, because you still got to take the mat and but that one-on-one where you couldn't look to the right. I mean, I played other sports and football and all that. And, the downside to those types of sports is you can blame the person next to you for missing the tackle or missing the block or whatever. And in wrestling, you're out there by yourself and you're in front of crowds, and there's no question about who made a mistake if you make one and it costs you. I like that. I like the responsibility that comes with taking ownership, and being responsible for your performance.
What was your high school life like when you interact with people and you have to try to navigate just the dynamics of a high school environment? What was that like for you?
Well, I came from, a very strong wrestling program in Western Pennsylvania. So wrestling was, we were good actually in two sports. Football and wrestling were our strongest sports. And the interaction was good because there was a respect level, there. I was one of the few wrestlers that actually made varsity in 9th grade. It didn't happen often because the programs were, that program was very strong. So I got a chance. I was actually in another school. I was down in the junior high when I was wrestling varsity on the senior high team. So, I think wrestling, if you pay attention to it, it teaches you respect. So, you respect people and they respect you back. And that's how I would sum up, the high school experience and interacting with people is, you get some attention, but by the same token, you need to respect, what they're doing and figure out what they're doing and be excited for them about what they're accomplishing and all of that.
Over the course of your wrestling, you talked about how you can't get away with things in wrestling and that you really do put in what you get out of it. Have you seen examples where you have a superior athlete who gets frustrated that they can't excel in wrestling because it takes way more work than what they thought?
Yes, I've experienced that for sure. And I think certainly any Division I coach in the country has had, and Division II and Division III experience. And I'm not saying that, but what I am saying is sometimes just because someone was successful in high school, more often than not, they'll be successful in college too. But there are experiences, and I had that, I've had that happen, where there's no question, they could have been good, but if they don't pay the price, then other people, the nice thing, and that's why I like coaching in college. I knew that early on. I was offered a job for a high school coach right at the same time that I landed the one at Ryder. And I told Ryder, I just need to make a decision because I'm about to sign a contract. And I knew at that time I wanted college. I wanted to coach at the university level. And some of that had a lot to do, with that transition to where you really are accountable unto yourself and the work ethic. Because in college, as long as the skill level is strong enough, the work ethic, and that's what I alluded to early in the first question that you asked. If you work hard enough, you can actually, I've had my first All-American never placed in a state tournament. He never, and yet he placed third in the entire nation. There were several other ones that I could mention in terms of All-Americans that they were not the 3-time state champs that were obvious that you go out and you recruit, them, and yet they beat, many of a lot of great wrestlers they beat. So the work ethic clearly pays dividends, along with, just the mental aspect of the sport and getting them to believe at that level.
How'd you accomplish that at Ryder? Because it's not a Big 8 or Big 12 now, Big 10 program. How do you get these guys to believe that your program can work for them?
That's a good question. I remember a first press conference, and they asked me a question. They said, what's kind of your goal here? What do you see happening in the future for rider wrestling? And I said something to the effect that, I'd like to see us, I'd like to bring both regional and national recognition to rider. And you certainly could have heard a pin drop, because at that time they had never had a nationally ranked wrestler. They'd never had a nationally ranked team, and they never had an All-American. In order to bring national recognition, you have to do something of that nature, or you're not going to bring national recognition. So I believe that. I had a wonderful opportunity to wrestle with Athletes in Action right before I came to Rider. And, having John Peterson as the Eastern coach, which is the team that I was on, and Gene Davis was the coach of the Western team. And sometimes we get together, with the two teams, and being around those types of people, of course, the Petersons, worked out and certainly learned and grew as wrestlers, being around Dan Gable and all of that. So a lot of that, just being around those people, I had a chance to be in a lot of the major wrestling practice rooms, and I knew I wanted to coach. So you get a chance to evaluate talent, and you also get a chance to evaluate work ethic, mental toughness, and all of those things. So that was a great experience prior to me coming into coaching. So I felt that by the time I got to Rider, I knew it was going to be hard, to do that. But, as it turns out, it was a real blessing just to see someone. By my second year there, we accomplished both. We had a kid place third in the nation. The team was finished 18th in the nation in the top 20 for a team that had never had that happen. So that kind of was a building block, to the second All-American. The second was a third and so on. They build on each other. So, but the experience, that I had prior to coming, I had a pretty good handle on how much talent it took. And I knew that particularly the one kid had the talent to do it. And, so that's kind of where the building block started. And once that happened, no one recruiting against me could say, well, why would you go there? Because you'll never be an All-American, or you can't be an All-American, because that ice was broke. And then, down the road, we had a chance to beat some teams from the conferences that you mentioned. And then, then you start to getting into a team situation. So now you're getting some individuals accomplishing the national recognition. You're starting to get your team, nationally recognized, and so that's kind of how it started, and that's how it kind of got moving in the direction of national recognition.
39 years of coaching. What is frustrating about being a head wrestling coach and trying to get to that level you're talking about?
I think the most frustrating thing is getting people to believe at that level that are actually capable of competing at that level. And they just don't have, they just haven't had the chance to build that kind of confidence. So it takes longer. That's my opinion. It takes longer with those types of individuals. And it takes longer, more on the mental aspect than it does on their ability or their strength and conditioning and all of that. Because, being around, as I mentioned, John Peterson and the workouts and so on, they were working hard enough. But getting them to believe that they had a right to go out and finish in the top 8 people in the nation and be an All-American, that was the hardest part, and it's tremendously rewarding when you see it happen. And so that's how I would answer your question to that.
Can everyone be great?
No. Everyone can be as great as they can be, okay? But there's certain kids, I mean, I've had multiple kids in that round of 12 that needed to just win that last match, and we'd have a lot more. But the kids that they were up against were very tough, and obviously, and you know, and some kids can't be at that level. So maybe for some kids, placing in a conference tournament is, and that's okay. If you know, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get everyone to reach their potential and their goals. And sometimes you have to get them to be realistic about their goals. And sometimes you have to move their goals forward because you know that they're capable of more than what they've set for themselves. You know, so, and that's the tricky part, and that's coaching. That's you know, that's learning. I respect, you know, all the kids that wrestled for me, and for the most part, they worked hard, and you know, they got to the level that they were pushing pretty hard to be as good as they can. It's tough in a small wrestling program, and you're up against, because we've been Division I ever since I've been there. So you're dealing with you know, you're dealing with wrestling the best in the country, and you gotta believe it as a coach, because if you don't, they're not going to, period. And if you don't believe in them, you're wasting your time. If you can't transfer that, and that's where I said sometimes you have to transfer that in baby steps, you know, especially at the beginning. Once you start proving that some of your kids, you know, some of your kids are all Americans, then obviously it gets a little bit easier for some of the other kids that are wrestling them every day and saying, wait a second, I go pretty well with that guy, or I beat that guy, you know, all the things that wrestlers talk about, you know. And then it makes it a little bit easier for them to understand, okay, but I still got to do it in a national tournament, you know, and that's where it gets a little more complicated. You might, you know, I've got kids in my room that I've watched them go dead even, or even beat, you know, some of the kids that were all Americans for me. And I said, well, that's part of the puzzle, but that's not the whole puzzle, because you got to do it now in front of, you know, 15,000, you know, 18,000 people. And you got to figure out a way to beat that opponent that you don't know a whole lot about.
There were a couple kids that went above and beyond. They reached that level, whether it was being All-American or not. Who are a couple that you felt like overachieved in what their potential was?
Well, that's a harder question. It's a harder question for probably different reasons than you think. Probably how I'd answer that, I would look at Lou DiSerafino was the first All-American, never placed in a national tournament. Had a kid named John Lucerne who placed 5th in the Pennsylvania States, but placed 4th in the nation. You know, Chad Walsh never won the New Jersey States, but he's a 2-time All-American. Tim Morrison beat the NCAA runner-up in the finals of the Penn State tournament. Dan Morrison beat 3 All-Americans in 1 year. I mean, I could almost name Adam Darengowski placed 3rd in the nation. He's a 1-time state champ out of New Jersey. I could literally come up through every All-American, same, you know, Doug would be also one of those who placed third in the nation, and you know, every one of them has a story, and particularly if you're at a small school, then you know, you're going to you know, you're gonna have kind of a special feeling about each one, because they were, although they were highly recruited, they were not recruited by Iowa and Penn State and Oklahoma State and Ohio State and so on. You know, and so each one of those stories would be a standout for a different different reason.
So, hey, I mean, you're retired now. You can just answer this honestly. Do you get extra satisfaction when you beat one of those big name programs in a match at the national tournament?
Well, I think in the national tournament and also in dual meets. I mean, we've beaten Ohio State in dual meets. We won the Lehigh Sheridan tournament the year that Nebraska, I think, was ranked 5th in the nation. And we beat Oklahoma. I think they were ranked 6th. And that in the Lehigh tournament, of course, you also have Lehigh and you also have a lot of other great teams. So do you get satisfaction? Yeah, you sure do. And my whole thing is, what I get satisfaction out is seeing the kids do that you're coaching, and knowing what it means to them, to transfer, to that, to that next level and actually beat someone. It's pretty amazing, to do that. So yeah, it feels real good.
Is there a void when you leave head coaching, because you're in it and you have this lifestyle that you're leading for 39 years and then it's gone? Is it a hard transition?
I struggle with answering that question, because 39 years is a long time to coach. And I certainly had an opportunity to, I certainly had an opportunity to experience the ups and downs of wrestling, as all coaches do. And, I don't know, there's aspects of it that were hard. I think the hardest thing my first year was because there were still kids. We still had 2 current All-Americans when I left in our program, that I was attached to, along with many of the other wrestlers, that I was currently coaching. So that was the hard part. As I get further and further out, and John and Nick are bringing in new kids, it gets a little bit easier. You get a little bit more relaxed, with it, because, most coaches wrestle throughout the match, even though they're not on the mat. So, you're watching kids that you, recruited and coached and all of those things out on the mat, and yet you're in the stands. Now, and you got to learn how to handle that. I think that's probably the harder. I mean, I have other interests, so I wasn't worried about being bored or anything like that, because, all of that kind of takes care of itself, of not being bored. So,
how much has music filled that void and been part of your active life right now?
It's filled it quite a bit. I spent a career, coaching. So, music is something that I've done throughout my career, much more so at the beginning, before I came to Rider. And then I stayed active, but not in the sense of being out, playing with bands and all of that. So the love of music and the passion for music is very strong. There's probably only a few of us that actually do both, that understand, but they're similar. They're competitive. And if you want to be good, there's a high price to pay. There's a lot of work there's a lot of work that goes into that, you know. So we're doing some things right now with distance recording with guys that I played with 45 years ago. So it's kind of interesting to do that with technology today. You don't actually have to be in the same room even to have a band. You know, you do if you're going to play live, obviously, but as far as making music and recording music, you know, you don't have to do that. So I'm enjoying some of that. I'm enjoying, you know, working on, you know, writing songs and playing with different musicians and doing harmonies and you know, all of those things. So
Do you got a guitar right there? You want to play us something?
I have a guitar, but I mean, I can send you when I get off the phone here. I can send you, you know, something that would, you know, would give you an idea of the distance with an old tune that you might know. It's called "All Along the Watchtower." Jimi Hendrix made it famous many years ago. Bob Dylan wrote it, and you know, I could you know, I could do something like that. I mean, I don't know. If you really want to hear something on the guitar, I would do that for you. But I can send you something that's a little more finished product.
I want to see both, so I'm going to ask that you do something right now on the spot, and then I want to hear All Along the Watchtower.
Okay. Give me wherever you are, know that I adore you. No matter how far, I can go before you.
Very well done.
Well, that's an idea. I was just thinking that you probably ought to play something that you actually know a little bit. So.
Oh, that was good, man. That was good. So, and thinking about music then, Gary, what song sums up your life?
That's a good question. You know, I don't know that I can answer that because I'm tied with a lot of different songs that mean a lot to me for, you know, a lot of different reasons.
What are a couple? Give me a couple that mean a lot to you.
That's well, I mean, George Harrison sang a song, you know, while my guitar gently weeps. I think that certainly, you know, talks to a lot of things that I think are important in life and so on. You know, McCartney certainly had some great songs that speak a lot to, you know, to life. There's a Christian artist by the name of Phil Keaggy that has a lot of songs that have meant, you know, a lot to me and speak to my life. You know, so, you know, those, I probably are influenced more by artists than a single song, is how I would sum some of that.
Yeah, then who are some of the artists that influence you and make you change as a person potentially?
Well, in recent years, I've done a lot of band work. So, the typical people, Bob Dylan and Neil Young and the Beatles and, those types of people, Eric Clapton and all of them. In recent years, as I've mellowed out a little more, I do more acoustic work. So people like Damien Rice, who's from, he's Irish, and David Gray, who's English, and some of the poetry that they write, and they're kind of like a modern day, a little more on Bob Dylan and so on. So I'm influenced by both the older artists that meant a lot to me, and I played, in bands, and the newer artists. So both definitely have had a strong influence, in my life, and for different for different reasons. So I was fortunate, in both to be around good people, both from a coaching standpoint and then from a musician standpoint. So all of those people around you highly influence you as much as, the wrestling and so on. I mean, John Hange, who's now the head coach, and Nick Bedleon, who's the assistant coach, certainly, were great to be around. John, I actually recruited out of high school. He actually told me no, and I told him he wasn't allowed to tell me no, and that I asked him if his father was there, because he was going to go somewhere else. And I owned a 1968 Chevy van at that time, and I drove that to his house, and I talked to his father. And make a long story short, his father saw more the advantages to going to Rider as a small, private, strong academic school. And so John came to Rider, and he was a one-time state champ out of high school, a late bloomer like Adam Darengowski, both late bloomers, but placed third and fourth in the nation. And then, I could mention names in music, but they wouldn't mean anything to you. But I think it's when you're around good people and they challenge you, and they're just good to be around. You learn things off of them. You learn life lessons and everything else.
What do you want to do in the remaining years that you have to be the most productive and most influential as possible?
You ask tough questions. You ask questions that really require some thought. So if I ever talk to you, I'm going to ask you to think of the questions before, and I'll answer them. You know what? I want to get old gracefully. Okay. Want to stay active as long as I possibly can, and I'm, still working out and doing things like that to enhance that. The music keeps you young, for sure, and I play music a lot with younger musicians and myself too. That certainly keeps you young, and getting into Rider and getting a chance to watch practices and work with John and Nick and the wrestlers also. That keeps you young. So I want to stay as active as I can, both in wrestling and music. They've had impacts in my life in different ways, and want to hold on to them, like everybody wants to hold on what's important to them. I don't golf. Never have, never will. Much too frustrating of a sport. Requires a ton of time, to get good at it. So I play music. That I do enjoy. I enjoy writing music and writing songs and, all of that.